table as well. One thing that we do not cover is introduction to version control system. So that chapter we are not covering in this track. And probably for those that are proficient in Python, you can suggest them to go through this Git section, right? Or tell everyone that this is an optional section that they can go over as their homework after this 2 days training. But again, this is just something we had to omit to shorten the time and give more time for other sections and exercises.
Yeah, just to kind of follow up with that. So when we were doing the DevNet Expresses with the developer environments with dcloud, that was the first thing that you did was go into Git and actually clone the repository down. But since we're now using the Learning Lab 2.0 environment, the repository is automatically cloned when the container is spun up, so it's current and we don't have to worry about that.
Right.
So we had to go through Git in order to even give them an understanding of how to get the code that they were going to be working on. But it just takes time. And again, most people use 3 Git commands and that's about it. And the amount of time that we were spending on it was taking up way more than it should have. So.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. Okay, so let's move on to part 2. So after they complete the labs, we on the basic stuff, we go into more complex concepts here, which is collections and loops and working with this part. This is the right place where I'm starting, right, Brian? That's just making sure
you got
that's
it.
the
Yeah.
part 2.
Part 2. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Brian covered some basic variable types. Now this section covers more advanced variable types such as lists, tuples, and dictionaries. And those are very important for working with the APIs. I would say those are the most useful variables and the most commonly used variables when you work with the APIs. And that's essentially the whole idea of the use cases we will be looking at in the second module, right? So list is essentially an ordered list of items. They can be of the same data type or of different data types. You can have strings, characters, digits in one list, and so on. Tuples is an immutable list. So tuple is essentially a list that you cannot modify. It cannot be changed. It's very useful when you need to pass variables into a function or receive an output from the function. This is where tuples are very commonly used. Also, when you work with large set of data that you're not going to change, but you use to sort or to analyze or do some math operations, for example, then you would convert a list to tuple just because it takes less memory to work with. So if you don't intend to modify the original data, but you want to use it for different operations, the best practice is to use tuples because they take much less memory than lists. And then dictionaries is so essentially in lists, you would have the values, the items themselves, and the reference to the item would be position in the list, right? So starting with 0, so that will be index 0, and then second item would be index 1. So they have digital index. In dictionary, to refer to a specific value, we don't use a digital index, but we use a key, which could be a word or some sort of a key, which can be any unique value by itself, right? And you will see dictionaries used a lot with when you have to process API outputs, right? So you receive some information from an API. It's usually structured in Java object notation, JSON format, and that format very easily can get converted into a Python dictionary, and that makes it very easy to work with the API output and make some modifications or operations with that data based on the dictionary. So some of the common methods, again, usually you can either jump to a Python interpreter if you have one installed, and just to show how to work with these things, how to refer to these variables using the index, how to assign value to a variable and things like that, and how to refer to dictionaries and how to work with dictionaries. For the sake of time, I'm probably not going to do it right now, or maybe later I can show some. But one important thing to mention is some of the methods that are used with dictionaries. So as I mentioned, dictionaries, they contain a key and the value pair in curly brackets, and they are comma separated. So there is a way, as you can see right here at the top, right? So this is our example dictionary. So the first value is 1 that we can refer to by the key A. The second value is 2, which can be referred to by using key B. So you can, to get to one single item, one single key and value pair, you can use the keyword items or the method items to be able to iterate through all of those key value pairs, which is very often necessary when you deal with the API outputs. For example, you need to iterate through secure endpoint events for specific computer, right, and process every single event. And that event will be a dictionary in general. Then you can use the method key to get to the keys, and then you can use the method values to get just to the values. And that the output of this method will be a list, right? A list of just keys or a list of just values will be very useful for using in the loops. And there are many other types of collections, which are specific collections, which are less used in a daily basis, but some of them are also interesting, such as counter, for example. I think from all of those, counter is probably the one I'm using more often than anything else. Yeah, and there's documentation. Take a look of them. I would say they're less commonly used, so we're not going to cover them in any deeper detail than just mentioning in the slides. So speaking of loops, there are two different types of loops that we can use with Python, an iterative loop or for loop, and conditional loop, which is while loop. For loops are by far more commonly used, I would say, when you deal with dictionaries and lists. Again, because Python allows you to easily iterate through your lists and dictionaries. And then while loop is used when you have to use some certain logical condition or a certain logical event to happen to break out of the loop and discontinue the action that you were repeating over and over again. So in this case, we see we assigned a value of 0 to a variable I. And while this variable is lower than 5, we print it out and we increment it by 1. And once we reach the value of 5, then we break out of the loop and we stop printing. So you see when we reach the value of 5, 5 is not less than 5. This is why we break out and we don't print the value of that variable anymore. So next thing we need to cover with, which is an important concept, is unpacking. It's very useful when you work with lists or when you work with functions and you want to assign the values from the list or from the function output, which will be tuple, to a specific variable. So you would see, you would list the variables using comma, then we use the equal sign, and then you will refer to a list, and then each specific value from that list will be assigned to each specific variable that you mentioned before. So most commonly I use it is to assign, if the function returns multiple values as an output, I use this kind of code logic to assign the output from a function to multiple variables that I'm going to work with going forward. So next, iterating through the dictionary. As I mentioned, that's something that is very commonly necessary when you work with API outputs. In this case, we see our dictionary contains, well, actually we don't see what our dictionary contains, but we can guess. The dictionary contains key value pairs where the key is the fruit and the value is the quantity of that fruit. And so to be able to assign for each key value pair the values to separate variables and work with them within the loop, this is the logic we would use, right? You would need to use the method items, which will give you the value of the key as a string, and the actual value from that dictionary into separate variable. And then you see we use fstring format here to print out those two variables. And then when we iterate to the next key value pair in that dictionary, then we will see that these two variables will change in the next loop iteration, and they will change again in the next loop iteration, and so on. And you see that what we are printing out here. So one example that we could use here is, again, the same. If you're processing events from a specific security tool, right, and for each event, you want to create a separate ServiceNow ticket, for example, right? So let's say from Cisco Secure Endpoint or from any EDR system, you're fetching via the API all of the events. And for each event, you want to capture the event ID and maybe the target, right? And you can do it by using the key value pairs from that dictionary, and then you can create a ServiceNow ticket in the loop. And then for each iteration, you will be working with the next event and the next information that you get from that dictionary. So that would be like a specific, more security applicable example. So one important thing to cover in this Python section is the structure of the script. That will be necessary to understand for the exercises we will be doing, because we will be maintaining a separate script where we will collect our reusable functions, but the actual logic that we want to execute for our use case will be maintained in the main script. And what the main script means, it's the script where you execute your logic. And so the first section, the first step that you will do in the script is you will use the import statement to import the libraries and function files that you want to use. There are system libraries, and there are also third-party libraries that can be installed. So there are tons of different packages that are created by different people, but there are also Python standard libraries, and the references are here for you to look at. So in this example, you will see the most commonly used library that we will also use to work with the APIs, which is requests. First, you would need to install this library using pip install. It's pre-installed in our environment already. And to use it within your script, you will need to use the import statement, which allows you to import the module. You are also able to import just specific methods from a module, and then you would use syntax from module import, and then you would list the specific methods. If you want to save the memory, for example, you're using, if you're only going to use just one method. An example here could be pretty print. So something that you will notice in upcoming modules as well. What we commonly use is we state from pprint, import pprint, and that's the only method that we will use from that library that allows us to print large text outputs in humanly readable form. Speaking of print, and let's talk a little bit more about debugging basics, right? So the first advice is, as you create new script or as you work through your script, use print statements to validate each step, the outputs, and things that you at each stage, what you're executing and what kind of variables and values you're getting through the script. They're very useful at troubleshooting. If you encounter a traceback, and we will see an example on the next page, you would need to read the traceback from the bottom up. So actually, let's take a look at that one. Here's an example of a traceback for one of the exercises that you will be doing and or have been doing already in this lab. And we will have to read it from the bottom up. Here we see not implemented error, and we will see that first occurred in line 38 in this function, right? Create fortune cookie message when we executed the script. And then the next, we will see the second time it appeared in line 50 and then in line 56. So the first time the error has occurred was in line 38. So we need to go back to our code and review what happened, what we have in that line. This is why we have to read it from the bottom up, because that will show us what was the first place in our script where this error occurred. Another good way to troubleshoot is to use, when you call your script, use -i option. That will leave you within an interpreter when your Python script breaks out with an error, and then you can check the variable statements and manually perform any additional commands within your script, because it will keep you within the interpreter, and that will allow you to troubleshoot the script better. And at this point, we would go into the exercise where the students would work with those variable types, loops, and tools. Yeah, and that would be about 15 minutes. At this point, I would just refer to the exercise, and then I would continue to parsing JSON section, and then I would let them do both labs for the JSON section and for the loops section together after completing the slides part. So at this point, I would just say there is a lab exercise that you will do, but first we are going to cover the JSON, parsing JSON portion as well, and then you will do 2 labs together so that we have a better flow. But it's definitely up to you as an instructor to do it one way or another. So JSON, as I mentioned before, is the JavaScript object notation that is being right now most commonly used standard for data representation when you work with REST APIs. You would use it to input some data, to pass data to your APIs, or to return data from your API requests as well. So that's the most commonly used standard. And one of the reasons is because it's easier to read and because it's very similar to dictionaries in Python, and it's very easy to convert to a dictionary and manipulate the data when you use JSON standard. So speaking of JSON and Python syntax, as you will see on the left-hand side, you see the JSON example, and on the right-hand side, you see a dictionary example, which is a very complex dictionary with nested dictionaries and nested list of dictionaries as well, right? But you can see that it converts to a Python structure very easily with very minor differences, such as you would need to use commas at the end of each key value pair or each dictionary or list object. And the Boolean value that we use in Python, such as true and false, they start with capital letter, right? So it's capital T in the true keyword or in false keyword, while in JSON, it's all lower capital keyword. So for this, because of these several reasons, and because when you receive your REST API output, it's represented in a text string, right? So you have to convert it to dictionary. We would use a JSON library that we will cover in a second to be able to parse out the JSON structure into a Python dictionary. I think I would probably change the order of the slides for that reason, because it just breaks the flow here. But this slide covers some basics of working with files and reading from file here, such as the key method open to open a file, and then you can use read, or you can use read line to read line by line, or you can use read to read the whole file into the content variable, and then you can print it out, and then you would need to use close method to close it. So to be able to not do it, you would need to use with as statement, which would automatically close the file for you. So with open as file, which is the variable that we give it, we can now do our operations with that file, referring it by the variable name. And then when we, by indentation, break out of the structure, this file will be closed automatically, right? But that file variable is not going to be accessible from outside of the with statement. Anyway, this is the best practice when you work with file to use with as methods, right? Quote, I don't know, example, right, statement, so that you don't forget to close your file. And it's very important to close files when you end working with them, because otherwise it can lead to file damages and you can lose your data completely. For example, if your script breaks with an error for some reason and you didn't close the file, then it may can corrupt your data. But if you use with statement and your script breaks, the file will be closed anyway. So I will change the order of the slides because it kind of breaks the flow a little bit, because now we are going back to working with the JSON structure right here and converting it to dictionaries. And here we can see we had a string which contains some JSON structure, let's say maybe received from an API response. And to be able to convert it into dictionary, we would use json.load_s method, and we will provide that string as an input. And then if we check the type of the data variable that will be the result of this operation, we will see that it's a dictionary. So now we can refer to any key value pairs and that nested dictionary and list of dictionary structure by using regular Python operations, same way as we manipulate dictionaries and lists within Python. And so the most common ways to do it, so you can load from file or using load method, or load s by loading from string, and same dump. And dump s will allow you to convert back into a string the dictionary structure that you can then either print out or save to file or pass somewhere as in form of a in an API call and so on. So these are very important concepts that are very useful when you work with the APIs, and you will see examples in the code that we will cover in Module 2 and Module 4, working with threat investigation use case. So I mentioned several times already a nest, that you can nest data. So you can nest a dictionary within a dictionary. So key will be your index that you refer to, and then the value will be the whole dictionary on its own, and that dictionary can have another nested dictionary inside, and that dictionary can have a nested list inside, and so on. So that can go pretty complicated very quickly, and it's important to grasp that concept because it's very important when you work with the APIs. You will see that a lot. So here's an example where we look at the JSON structure, where we see information about a network interface on a switch or a router, which contains information in JSON structure. And then when we convert it to Python, then we would be able to refer and get access to specific value that we need to manipulate. So for example, here this slide asks, how would you need to refer to the value of the key IP to be able to receive, to get this API, this IP address from this whole JSON blob? So we would ask students to think about it and come up with their solutions. And then on the next slide, there is a solution. Potentially, you could give them a prize for coming up with the correct answer to this during the session. So at this point, we have reached the end of this JSON section.